Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 7 of our complete practice question series for the AZ-400 Microsoft Certified DevOps Engineer Expert exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 7. Question number 267. Scenario. An Azure pipeline contains 10 independent jobs that compile an application for different processor architectures. The jobs currently execute sequentially on self-hosted infrastructure, and the build takes almost 1 day. Which 2 actions should the team perform to run more architecture jobs concurrently? Select 2 answers. The available options are as follows. Option A. Add sufficient self-hosted agents to an agent pool. Option B. Adopt a blue-green deployment strategy. Option C. Reduce the number of Git branches. Option D. Increase the available Azure pipeline's parallel job capacity. Option E. Create a deployment group for the build servers. The correct answers are Option A. Add sufficient self-hosted agents to an agent pool, and Option D. Increase the available Azure pipeline's parallel job capacity. Here's why. Each simultaneous job requires an available agent and an Azure pipeline's parallel job entitlement. Providing both allows the independent architecture builds to execute concurrently. Why are the other options not correct? B. Blue-green is a deployment strategy and does not parallelize compilation. C. Reducing branch count does not provide additional job execution capacity. E. Deployment groups organize deployment targets rather than build agent concurrency. Exam tip. Pipeline concurrency is limited by both available agents and licensed parallel job capacity. Question number 268. Scenario. An organization is adopting Azure Deployment Environments, ADE, to provide developers with governed, self-service infrastructure for testing. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate ADE component. Statement 1. The top-level resource that defines the configuration and environment types across the enterprise is the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are Dev Center, Project, or Workspace. Statement 2. The standardized infrastructure as code templates available to developers are stored in and attached the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are Catalog, Environment Type, or Feed. For Statement 1, the correct selection is Dev Center. The Dev Center provides central governance and configuration. For Statement 2, the correct selection is Catalog. Catalogs link the Dev Center to the source control repositories hosting infrastructure as code templates. Exam tip. Understand the ADE hierarchy. Dev Centers manage configuration centrally. Catalogs provide the infrastructure as code templates, and projects assign these to development teams. Question number 269. Scenario. An application insights availability alert uses an Azure Monitor Action Group to invoke a logic app. The logic app receives the alert payload and then sends email notifications and creates follow-up tasks. Which logic app's trigger should start the workflow? The available options are as follows. Option A. An API connection trigger. Option B. A request trigger. Option C. A recurrence trigger. Option D. An HTTP webhook trigger that waits for callback registration. The correct answer is Option B, a request trigger. Here's why. The request trigger exposes a callback URL that an Azure Monitor Action Group can invoke with an HTTP post containing the alert payload. Why are the other options not correct? A. An API connection trigger listens to events from a configured connector rather than receiving the Action Group request directly. C. A recurrence trigger starts on a schedule and would not react immediately to the availability alert. D. An HTTP webhook trigger manages webhook subscription and callback behavior that is not required for a direct Action Group invocation. Exam tip. Use a request trigger when an external service must start a logic app by posting a payload to its generated endpoint. Question number 270. Scenario. A web application experiences predictable weekly changes in traffic volume. The operations team needs an automatically learned baseline that detects an abnormal increase in failed request rate without requiring administrators to maintain a static query threshold. Which application insights capability should be used? The available options are as follows. Option A. Azure Service Health Alerts. Option B. the Application Insights Failures Blade. Option C, Smart Detection for Failure Anomalies. Option D, a manually maintained log analytics alert query. The correct answer is option C, Smart Detection for Failure Anomalies. Here's why. Smart Detection learns normal failure behavior from Application Insights telemetry and identifies unusual increases while accounting for changing request volume and historical patterns. Why are the other options not correct? A. Service Health reports Azure Platform incidents and maintenance events rather than application request anomalies. B. The Failures Blade supports investigation but does not automatically learn an alert on abnormal failure rate changes by itself. D. A manually maintained query alert requires administrators to define and tune thresholds. Exam tip. Use anomaly detection when normal behavior varies over time and static thresholds would require frequent maintenance. Question number 271. Scenario. A legacy Azure Pipelines task authenticates to Microsoft Entra ID by using a service principal and a client secret. The task does not use a predefined Azure Service Connection. Which three identity values must be configured? Select three answers. The available options are as follows. Option A, the tenant ID. Option B, the Azure Subscription ID. Option C, the application or client ID. Option D, the Service Principal Object ID. Option E, the client secret. The correct answers are Option A, the tenant ID, Option C, the application or client ID, and Option E, the client secret. Here's why. The tenant ID identifies the Microsoft Entra directory, the application ID identifies the service principal's application, and the client secret proves the application's identity during secret-based authentication. Why are the other options not correct? B. A subscription ID identifies an Azure resource scope, but is not one of the three identity credentials used to obtain a Microsoft Entra token. D. The Service Principal Object ID identifies the directory object, but is not used as the OAuth client identifier. Exam tip. Secret-based Service Principal authentication uses tenant ID, client ID, and client secret. Resource scope is configured separately. Question number 272. Scenario. A team stores an application in Azure repos. The security pipeline must identify direct and transitive open source dependencies that contain known vulnerabilities and report whether a secure package version is available. Which capability should the DevOps engineer configure? The available options are as follows. Option A, GitHub Advanced Security Dependency Scanning for Azure DevOps. Option B, an Octopus Deploy Release Step. Option C, a Gradle Wrapper task. Option D, a Jenkins deployment job. The correct answer is Option A, GitHub Advanced Security Dependency Scanning for Azure DevOps. Here's why. Dependency scanning analyzes package manifests and restored dependency information, identifies vulnerable open-source components, and reports available remediation versions. Why are the other options not correct? B. Octopus Deploy orchestrates releases and does not provide package dependency vulnerability analysis. C. Gradle builds and resolves dependencies but is not, by itself, a vulnerability database and scanning service. D. Jenkins executes automation jobs, but requires a separate security scanning integration. Exam tip. Use dependency scanning or software composition analysis for vulnerable packages. Use code scanning for weaknesses in first-party source code. Question number 273. Scenario. A project coordinator in a private Azure DevOps project must create and save personal work item queries for progress reporting. The coordinator does not require project administration privileges. To which default project security group should the coordinator be added? The available options are as follows. Option A, Project Collection Administrators. Option B, Readers. Option C, Contributors. Option D, Project Administrators. The correct answer is Option C, Contributors. Here's why. Contributors have the work tracking permissions required to create and save personal work item queries without receiving project-level administrative control. Why are the other options not correct? A. Project collection administrators receive organization-wide administrative permissions that violate least privilege. B. Readers have read-only project permissions and are not the appropriate default group for creating and saving work tracking content. D. Project administrators can manage the entire project and provide substantially more privilege than required. Exam tip. Use contributors for ordinary work item creation and query activity. Grant query folder permissions separately when shared queries are required. Question number 274. Scenario. Dependabot identifies a vulnerable library in a GitHub repository and automatically opens a security update pull request containing the required dependency change. The update has been reviewed and is ready to progress through the repository workflow. Which action should an authorized reviewer perform first? The available options are as follows. Option A. Create another branch manually. Option B. Create a second pull request. Option C. Approve the Dependabot pull request. Option D. Commit the same dependency change directly to the default branch. The correct answer is option C. Approve the Dependabot pull request. Here's why. Dependabot security updates are delivered through automatically generated pull requests. After reviewing the change, an authorized reviewer approves the existing pull request so it can satisfy the repository's merge controls. Why are the other options not correct? A. Dependabot has already created the branch used by its pull request. B. Creating a duplicate pull request is unnecessary. D. A direct commit bypasses the established pull request workflow and duplicates the generated change. Exam tip. Dependabot proposes dependency updates through pull requests. Review, validate, approve, and merge those pull requests according to branch protection rules. Question number 275. Scenario. A delivery team uses Azure boards and Microsoft Teams. A team's channel must receive notifications whenever work items in a selected area path are updated. Which integration should the team configure? The available options are as follows. Option A. An Azure Boards app subscription in the Teams channel. Option B. Microsoft Teams external access settings. Option C. An Azure DevOps dashboard tab without a subscription. Option D. A pipeline artifact publishing extension. Option E. A new Teams channel without linking the Azure Boards project. The correct answer is option A. An Azure Boards app subscription in the Teams channel. Here's why. The Azure Boards app for Microsoft Teams can link a project to a channel and create filtered subscriptions for work item creation and update events. Why are the other options not correct? B. External access controls communication with external Teams users and does not subscribe to Azure Boards events. C. A dashboard tab displays project content but does not create work item update notifications. D. Artifact publishing is unrelated to Azure Boards events. E. A channel alone has no connection to the Azure DevOps project. Exam tip. Use the specialized Azure Boards, Azure Repos, or Azure Pipelines collaboration app that matches the event source. Question number 276. Scenario. A Jenkins server builds code stored in Azure Repos. Jenkins must be notified immediately whenever a developer pushes a commit to a selected branch. For the statement, select yes if the proposed solution satisfies the requirement. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Create an Azure DevOps service hook for Jenkins that uses the code pushed event. Statement 1. Create an Azure DevOps service hook for Jenkins that uses the code pushed event. The answer is yes. The event directly matches the required repository push and can notify Jenkins immediately. Exam tip. Choose the service hook event that represents the activity that should start the external workflow. Question number 277. Scenario. Azure Monitor generates an alert whenever a production web application records a server-side failure. The operations team wants the alert payload processed by a workflow and posted to Microsoft Teams. Which two actions should the team perform? Select two answers. The available options are as follows. Option A. Add an Azure Monitor workbook. Option B. Create a logic app that starts with a request trigger. Option C. Add an Azure DevOps trigger to a logic app. Option D. Configure the Azure Monitor Action Group to invoke the logic app. Option E. Change only the resource diagnostic settings. The correct answers are option B. Create a logic app that starts with a request trigger, and option D. Configure the Azure Monitor Action Group to invoke the logic app. Here's why. The request trigger provides an HTTP endpoint for the workflow. The Azure Monitor Action Group invokes that endpoint when the alert fires, after which the logic app can post the alert to Microsoft Teams. Why are the other options not correct? A. A workbook visualizes monitoring data but does not deliver alert notifications. C. An Azure DevOps trigger responds to Azure DevOps events rather than Azure Monitor alerts. D. Diagnostic settings route resource logs and metrics, but do not invoke the team's notification workflow. Exam tip. Use an action group to route an alert and a logic app to implement customized notification processing. Question number 278. Scenario. A GitHub Enterprise Cloud organization must authenticate members through Microsoft Entra ID by using SAML single sign-on. No enterprise application has been configured for GitHub in the tenant. Which action should the identity administrator perform first? The available options are as follows. Option A. Add the GitHub Enterprise Cloud application from the Microsoft Entra application gallery. Option B. Create a Microsoft Entra external ID tenant. Option C. Create a conditional access policy before establishing the enterprise application. Option D. Enable SAML enforcement in GitHub before configuring the identity provider. The correct answer is option A. Add the GitHub Enterprise Cloud application from the Microsoft Entra application gallery. Here's why. The enterprise application establishes GitHub as a service provider in Microsoft Entra ID and provides the SAML configuration required before SSO can be completed and enforced in GitHub. Why are the other options not correct? B. A separate external identity tenant is not required for workforce authentication to GitHub. C. Conditional access can be applied after the enterprise application and sign-in path exist. D. Enforcing SAML in GitHub before the identity provider configuration is complete can prevent users from authenticating. Exam tip. Configure and test the identity provider relationship before enforcing SAML SSO for a source control organization. Question number 279. Scenario. An Azure Container Instances group contains an API container and a database container. The database performs a lengthy initialization and must not receive application traffic until it can process requests successfully. Which health check should be configured for the database container? The available options are as follows. Option A. A readiness probe. Option B. A liveness probe. Option C. An Azure Load Balancer probe. Option D. A performance counter log. The correct answer is option A. A readiness probe. Here's why. A readiness probe determines whether a container is prepared to accept requests. The database remains unavailable to dependent traffic until initialization completes successfully. Why are the other options not correct? B. A liveness probe determines whether a container should be restarted, not whether it should receive traffic. C. An Azure Load Balancer probe is not the container-level readiness mechanism for this container group. D. A performance log records information but does not control request eligibility. Exam tip. Use readiness to control traffic and liveness to control container restart behavior. Question number 280. Scenario. A production application contains code for a new integration that depends on a service still under development. The application update must be deployed now, but the integration must remain disabled until the dependent service is released. Which technique should the team implement? The available options are as follows. Option A. A repository fork. Option B. A build branch. Option C. A feature flag. Option D. A branch policy. The correct answer is option C. A feature flag. Here's why. A feature flag separates code deployment from feature release. The integration code can be deployed in a disabled state and enabled after the dependent service becomes available. Why are the other options not correct? A. A fork creates an independent repository copy and does not provide runtime feature activation. B. A branch isolates source changes but does not enable or disable already deployed code. D. A branch policy governs repository changes and cannot control application behavior at runtime. Exam tip. Use feature flags when code must be deployed before users or dependencies are ready for the feature. Question number 281. Scenario. An infrastructure pipeline deploys an Azure virtual network by using an ARM template. The virtual network must contain exactly 256 total IPv4 addresses, and its application subnet must contain exactly 64 total IPv4 addresses. Complete the address prefixes in the template. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Set the virtual network address prefix to the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are 10.40.0.0.0/23, 10.40.0.0.0/24, or 10.40.0.0.0/25. Statement 2. Set the application subnet address prefix to the blank. The choices for Statement 2 are 10.40.0.0.0/25, 10.40.0.0.0/26, or 10.40.0.0.0/27. For Statement 1, the correct selection is 10.40.0.0.0/24. A /24 network leaves 8 host bits and therefore contains 2 to the power of 8, or 256, total addresses. For Statement 2, the correct selection is 10.40.0.0/26. A /26 network leaves 6 host bits and therefore contains 2 to the power of 6, or 64, total addresses. Exam tip. The total number of IPv4 addresses in a prefix is 2-32, prefix length, although Azure reserves some subnet addresses from workload assignment. Question number 282. Scenario. An organization wants to prevent unauthorized changes to its Azure DevOps project configuration and detect configuration drift. For the statement, select yes if the proposed solution satisfies the requirement. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Enable continuous integration triggers for the project's source repositories. Statement 1. Enable continuous integration triggers for the project's source repositories. The answer is no. CI automates source validation and builds, not project configuration governance. Exam tip. Use permissions, auditing, policy, and configuration as code controls for platform configuration. CI triggers govern build execution. Question number 283. Scenario. A platform team defines an approved configuration baseline for its delivery environment. The team must evaluate the deployed configuration repeatedly, identify drift, and initiate remediation when the environment no longer conforms to the baseline. For the statement, select yes if the proposed solution supports the requirement. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Implement continuous assurance checks that compare the environment with the approved baseline and report or remediate configuration drift. Statement 1. Implement continuous assurance checks that compare the environment with the approved baseline and report or remediate configuration drift. The answer is yes. Recurring baseline evaluation provides ongoing evidence of compliance and exposes configuration drift. Exam tip. Continuous assurance evaluates whether controls remain effective over time. Preventive permissions should complement drift detection and remediation. Question number 284. Scenario. A legacy service is difficult to enhance because its methods contain deeply nested logic, excessive coupling, and duplicated decision paths. The team wants to reduce the technical debt that slows feature delivery. For the statement, select yes if the recommendation supports the goal. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Refactor the service to reduce unnecessary code complexity while preserving its tested behavior. Statement 1. Refactor the service to reduce unnecessary code complexity while preserving its tested behavior. The answer is yes. Simpler, tested code reduces an important source of technical debt and makes future changes safer. Exam tip. Reduce technical debt through controlled refactoring, automated tests, lower coupling, and removal of unnecessary complexity. Question number 285. Scenario. A classic Azure release pipeline deploys infrastructure to a subscription governed by Azure policy. Production deployment must stop when the target scope contains resources that fail the assigned policy requirements. Which pipeline control should the team configure? The available options are as follows. Option A, a deployment queue that retains only the latest release. Option B, a pre-deployment Azure policy compliance gate. Option C, a source-triggered deployment condition. Option D, a pipeline variable containing the policy assignment name. The correct answer is option B, a pre-deployment Azure policy compliance gate. Here's why. The Azure Policy Compliance Gate evaluates the target Azure scope before deployment and stops the release when the policy compliance assessment fails. Why are the other options not correct? A. Deployment queue settings determine how competing releases are processed. C. A deployment trigger determines when a release begins and does not validate policy compliance. D. A variable stores a value but performs no policy assessment. Exam tip. Use a pre-deployment gate when compliance must be confirmed before resources or applications are released. Question number 286. Scenario. An ASP.NET Core application requires an Application Insights utilization baseline. The implementation must collect representative application telemetry while limiting telemetry ingestion and storage costs during traffic spikes. Which two actions should the development team perform? Select two answers. The available options are as follows. Option A, instrument the application with Azure Monitor Application Insights telemetry. Option B, disable all telemetry sampling. Option C, enable adaptive sampling for the Application Insights SDK. Option D, configure the application to retain every dependency and request event. Option E, remove Application Insights instrumentation after establishing the baseline. The correct answers are Option A, instrument the application with Azure Monitor Application Insights telemetry, and Option C, enable adaptive sampling for the Application Insights SDK. Here's why. Application Insights instrumentation produces the request, dependency, exception, and usage telemetry required for the baseline. Adaptive sampling reduces the volume retained during high traffic while preserving a representative telemetry set. Why are the other options not correct? B. Disabling sampling can significantly increase ingestion and retention costs. D. Retaining every event conflicts with the requirement to minimize telemetry storage cost. E. Removing instrumentation prevents continued baseline and operational measurements. Exam tip. Instrument the application first, then use adaptive or fixed-rate sampling to control telemetry volume without eliminating observability. Question number 287. Scenario. A project currently uses several internal and external package feeds. The team wants one Azure Artifacts feed that stores packages published internally and caches packages consumed from both public and authenticated external feeds. Which Azure Artifacts capability should the team enable? The available options are as follows. Option A, feed views. Option B, a symbol server. Option C, upstream sources. Option D, universal packages. The correct answer is Option C, upstream sources. Here's why. Upstream sources allow an Azure Artifacts feed to resolve and cache packages from configured public or authenticated external feeds while also storing internally published packages. Why are the other options not correct? A. Views promote or expose selected package versions, but do not connect the feed to external package sources. B. A symbol server stores debugging symbols. D. Universal packages is a package type and does not aggregate remote package feeds. Exam tip. Use upstream sources for dependency aggregation and caching. Use views for package promotion. Question number 288. Scenario. Two Azure pipelines use the same self-hosted agent, but require conflicting versions of build tools and libraries. The organization wants isolated build environments without purchasing another agent host. Which pipeline design should the team implement? The available options are as follows. Option A, run each build as a separate container job. Option B, Add a second permanent self-hosted agent computer. Option C. Change the host operating system without isolating the dependencies. Option D. Add a Docker Compose deployment task after both builds. The correct answer is Option A. Run each build as a separate container job. Here's why. Container jobs isolate the tools and dependencies required by each application while allowing both pipelines to use the same underlying self-hosted agent infrastructure. Why are the other options not correct? B. Another permanent agent host increases infrastructure cost. C. Changing the host operating system does not isolate conflicting dependency versions. D. Docker Compose coordinates containers, but adding a deployment task after the builds does not isolate the build jobs themselves. Exam tip. Use container jobs to create repeatable, isolated tool chains on shared agent infrastructure. Question number 289. Scenario. An Azure web application experiences recurring but variable traffic patterns. When usage becomes abnormally high, the platform must automatically increase application logging without requiring administrators to maintain a fixed threshold. Which two resources should be included in the solution? Select two answers. The available options are as follows. Option A. An Azure Monitor alert that uses a dynamic threshold. Option B. An Azure Automation runbook that changes the logging configuration. Option C. An Azure Monitor alert with a permanently fixed threshold. Option D. An action group that sends email only. Option E. Azure Monitor autoscale settings without configuration automation. The correct answers are Option A. An Azure Monitor alert that uses a dynamic threshold, and Option B. An Azure Automation runbook that changes the logging configuration. Here's why. The dynamic threshold learns normal metric behavior and detects meaningful deviations without a manually maintained fixed limit. The runbook automates the configuration change that increases logging. Why are the other options not correct? C. A fixed threshold requires manual tuning as normal usage changes. D. An email-only action informs an administrator but does not change the logging level automatically. E. Autoscale changes capacity and does not update application logging configuration. Exam tip. Combine anomaly-aware detection with an automated remediation action when operational configuration must change dynamically. Question number 290. Scenario. A build pipeline must reuse files and caches left in its working directory by previous runs. The workspace must not be recreated automatically for every job. Which agent type should the team use? The available options are as follows. Option A. A Microsoft-hosted agent. Option B. A self-hosted agent. Option C. A Microsoft-hosted parallel job entitlement. Option D. A file transform task. The correct answer is Option B. A self-hosted agent. Here's why. A self-hosted agent can retain its working directory, downloaded dependencies, and build caches across jobs when the pipeline clean settings permit reuse. Why are the other options not correct? A. Microsoft-hosted agents provide a fresh virtual machine for each job and do not preserve the previous workspace. C. A parallel job entitlement controls concurrency rather than workspace persistence. D. File transform changes configuration files and does not preserve an agent environment. Exam tip. Use self-hosted agents or external caches when build performance depends on persistent local state. Question number 291. Scenario. An operations team needs a consolidated monitoring page for resources distributed across several resource groups. The page must support Azure RBAC, Markdown documentation, pinned Azure Monitor visuals generated from KQL, and refresh data when the page is opened. Which Azure resource should the team create? The available options are as follows. Option A. An Azure Portal dashboard. Option B. A Power BI semantic model. Option C. An Azure Data Explorer database. Option D. An Azure Monitor data collection rule. The correct answer is Option A. An Azure Portal dashboard. Here's why. An Azure dashboard is an Azure resource that supports Azure RBAC, Markdown tiles, and pinned Azure Monitor or Log Analytics query visualizations that refresh from their underlying data sources. Why are the other options not correct? B. Power BI can visualize data but does not directly provide the specified Azure Portal dashboard experience and Azure Resource Integration. C. Azure Data Explorer executes KQL but is not the consolidated presentation resource requested. D. A data collection rule controls telemetry ingestion and does not provide a monitoring page. Exam tip. Use Azure dashboards for consolidated portal views and Azure Monitor workbooks when richer interactive analysis is required. Question number 292. Scenario. Developers use Git command line tools to access Azure repos. The authentication design should use their organizational identities and allow Git Credential Manager to acquire and cache authentication tokens so that credentials are not entered for every operation. Which identity type should be used? The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure DevOps Alternate Credentials. Option B, Microsoft Entry User Accounts. Option C, Azure Resource Managed Identities. Option D, Manually Entered Azure DevOps Personal Access Tokens. The correct answer is option B, Microsoft Entry User Accounts. Here's why. Git Credential Manager can authenticate developers interactively through Microsoft Entra ID and cache the resulting token, reducing repeated credential prompts. Why are the other options not correct? A. Alternate credentials are a legacy password-based mechanism. C. Managed identities are intended for Azure-hosted workloads and are not ordinary developer identities for interactive Git operations. D. PATs are manually managed secrets and increase credential lifecycle and exposure concerns. Exam tip. Use Microsoft Entra Authentication and Git Credential Manager for human Git access. Reserve workload identities for automation. Question number 293. Scenario. A distributed engineering team requires pre-configured development environments that integrate with GitHub repositories, include browser-accessible editing and debugging tools, and work from Chromebooks and other devices used for hot desking. Which development environment should the organization provide? The available options are as follows. Option A, a local installation of MonoDevelop. Option B, GitHub Codespaces. Option C, a local installation of Visual Studio Code. Option D, Xamarin Studio. The correct answer is option B, GitHub Codespaces. Here's why. GitHub Codespaces provides remotely hosted, repository-integrated development environments that can be opened in a browser and include Visual Studio Code editing, terminal, extension, and debugging capabilities. Why are the other options not correct? A. MonoDevelop is a locally installed IDE and does not provide centrally hosted browser-accessible environments. C. Local Visual Studio Code requires a suitable developer computer and local environment configuration. D. Xamarin Studio is a retired local mobile development IDE. Exam tip. Use a cloud development environment when developers need consistent tooling from browsers and low-powered or shared endpoint devices. Question number 294. Scenario. An Azure pipeline deploys a mutually authenticated HTTPS application to an Azure Virtual Machine scale set. Rolling upgrades must determine whether each instance is healthy and eligible to continue through the upgrade process. The solution should require minimal custom scripting. Which component should be configured on the scale set instances? The available options are as follows. Option A, Azure Monitor Autoscale. Option B, the custom script extension. Option C, an Azure Load Balancer TCP probe. Option D, the application health extension. The correct answer is option D, the application health extension. Here's why. The application health extension evaluates application health from within each scale set instance and reports that state to the scale set platform for rolling upgrades and automatic repair decisions. Why are the other options not correct? A. Autoscale changes the number of instances based on metrics and does not report upgrade eligibility. B. A custom script would require the team to implement and maintain its own health reporting mechanism. C. A simple load balancer probe does not directly provide the VM scale set application health signal required for upgrade orchestration and can be complicated by client certificate requirements. Exam tip. Use the application health extension when VM scale set upgrade or repair behavior must depend on application-level instance health. Question number 295. Scenario. Application Insights monitors a production web application. The operations team needs automatic notifications when telemetry shows an unexpected increase in failures or performance degradation. Which application insights capability should the team enable? The available options are as follows. Option A, continuous export. Option B, usage analysis. Option C, smart detection. Option D, custom events. Option E, application insights profiler only. The correct answer is option C, smart detection. Here's why. Smart detection analyzes application insights telemetry and generates notifications for abnormal patterns such as sudden increases in failure rates or performance degradation. Why are the other options not correct? A. Continuous export transfers telemetry and does not detect anomalies. B. Usage analysis focuses on user behavior and adoption. D. Custom events are telemetry records and do not provide anomaly detection by themselves. E. Profiler captures performance traces, but is not the automatic failure and performance anomaly alerting capability. Exam tip. Use smart detection for automatically learned anomalies and metric alerts when explicit thresholds are required. Question number 296. Scenario. The Azure Pipelines app is installed in a Slack workspace, and an administrator is authenticated to Azure DevOps from the app. A channel must begin receiving build notifications for a specific pipeline. Which action should the administrator perform first in the Slack channel? The available options are as follows. Option A, run/as pipeline subscribe with the pipeline URL. Option B, create an organization-wide Azure DevOps notification. Option C, create a generic Slack service hook subscription. Option D, add a project-level email notification. The correct answer is option A, run/as pipeline subscribe with the pipeline URL. Here's why. The subscribe command links the Slack channel to the selected Azure pipeline and creates the default pipeline event subscriptions, which can then be customized. Why are the other options not correct? B. Organization-wide Azure DevOps notifications do not configure the Azure Pipelines Slack app. C. The specialized Azure Pipelines app does not require a generic service hook for its normal subscription workflow. D. Email notification settings do not deliver events to the Slack channel. Exam tip. Install and authenticate the Azure Pipelines collaboration app, subscribe the channel, and then customize the event filters. Question number 297. Scenario. An organization must detect open-source components and license policy violations automatically whenever developers add new dependencies to an application. Which capability should be integrated into the build pipeline? The available options are as follows. Option A, OWASP ZAP Dynamic Application Testing. Option B, a code formatting rule set. Option C, a software composition analysis and license scan. Option D, a Jenkins agent without a scanning plugin. The correct answer is option C, a software composition analysis and license scan. Here's why. Software composition analysis inventories open-source dependencies and evaluates their known vulnerabilities and licenses against organizational policies during the build. Why are the other options not correct? A. OWASP ZAP performs dynamic testing against a running web application and does not inventory package licenses. B. Formatting rules assess source style rather than third-party component licensing. D. Jenkins provides pipeline execution but requires a dedicated software composition analysis integration. Exam tip. Use software composition analysis for dependency, vulnerability, and license governance. Question number 298. Scenario. A repository contains many unreachable Git objects. An administrator wants to repack objects aggressively and immediately remove unreachable objects that would otherwise remain until the normal expiration period. Complete the maintenance commands. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. Run git gc the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are auto, aggressive, no prune, or force. Statement 2. Run git the blank. Expire now. The choices for Statement 2 are merge, reset, prune, or rebase. For statement 1, the correct selection is aggressive. The option directs Git to spend additional processing time optimizing object compression. For statement 2, the correct selection is prune. The command removes unreachable objects whose expiration is set to the current time. Exam tip: Git garbage collection repacks and optimizes objects. Pruning permanently removes unreachable objects after the selected expiration period. Question number 299. Scenario: An agile team needs developers to work on independent changes concurrently. The main branch must remain releasable, experimental changes must be isolated, and unfinished features must be disposable without affecting other work. Which branching strategy should the team adopt? The available options are as follows. Option A: one long-running main branch with short-lived feature branches. Option B: one long-running branch with all developers committing directly. Option C: a permanent branch for every development task. Option D: one unrelated repository fork for every developer. The correct answer is option A, one long-running main branch with short-lived feature branches. Here's why. Short-lived feature branches isolate parallel and experimental work while the main branch remains protected and releasable. An unwanted feature can be abandoned by deleting its branch. Why are the other options not correct? B. Directly committing all work to main exposes incomplete experiments to the releasable branch. C. Permanent task branches accumulate divergence and increase merge complexity. D. A separate fork for every team member adds unnecessary repository management overhead for an internal team workflow. Exam tip: use short-lived feature branches with frequent integration when parallel work requires isolation, but main must remain releasable. Question number 300. Scenario: a Jenkins build must start whenever code is pushed to a branch in Azure repos. For the statement, select yes if the proposed service hook configuration satisfies the requirement. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Configure the Jenkins service hook to use the build completed event. Statement 1. Configure the Jenkins service hook to use the build completed event. The answer is no. The service hook must use the code pushed event to respond directly to repository commits. Exam tip: match repository activities to code events and pipeline activities to build or release events. Question number 301. Scenario: a cloud-hosted Jenkins server must clone a private Git repository from Azure repos. The Jenkins integration cannot use Microsoft Intra Workload Identity Federation and must use a narrowly scoped legacy credential. Which 3 actions should the administrator perform? Select 3 answers. The available options are as follows. Option A: install or enable the Jenkins Git plugin and configure the Azure repos clone URL. Option B: create a PAT with the required code red scope in Azure DevOps. Option C: store the PAT in the Jenkins credential store and associate it with the repository. Option D: create a build completed service hook to authorize Git clone operations. Option E: create a webhook in Jenkins to replace repository authentication. The correct answers are option A: install or enable the Jenkins Git plugin and configure the Azure repos clone URL. Option B: create a PAT with the required code read scope in Azure DevOps. And option C: store the PAT in the Jenkins credential store and associate it with the repository. Here's why. The Git plugin performs the clone. The repository URL identifies the Azure repos source, and the scoped PT supplies authorization when the legacy Jenkins integration cannot use a modern Microsoft Intra credential. Why are the other options not correct? D. A build completed service hook can trigger an external workflow but does not authenticate Git repository access. E. A webhook delivers event notifications and cannot replace credentials used during clone or fetch operations. Exam tip: repository retrieval requires a source control client, a clone URL, and an authorized credential. Event hooks solve a different problem. Question number 302. Scenario: a software organization plans to host 4 projects in Azure repos. Each project has a different source control requirement. Drag the appropriate Azure repos version control system to each requirement. Each system may be used more than once. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1, Git. Source item 2, Team Foundation version control. Source item 3, Subversion. Source item 4, Perforce. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A. Repository permissions must restrict access to individual files and folders. Destination B. Pull requests must require 2 reviewers and a linked work item before merging. Destination C. Developers must work with the repository directly from Xcode. Destination D. A release branch must be visible and editable only by release managers. The first correct mapping is Git. Map to pull requests must require 2 reviewers and a linked work item before merging. The second correct mapping is Git. Map to developers must work with the repository directly from Xcode. The third correct mapping is Team Foundation version control. Map to repository permissions must restrict access to individual files and folders. The fourth correct mapping is Team Foundation version control. Map to a release branch must be visible and editable only by release managers. Here's why. TFVC supports permissions on individual version control paths, including files, folders, and branch folders. Azure Repos Git provides pull request branch policies and is supported natively by Xcode. Exam tip. Azure Repos Git provides distributed workflows and branch policies, while TFVC provides centralized path-level permissions. Question number 303. Scenario. An Azure pipeline compiles and tests a Maven-based Java application. The pipeline must calculate code coverage and publish the coverage report with the build results. Which coverage tool should the team use? The available options are as follows. Option A, JUnit. Option B, Jacoco. Option C, Bullseye coverage. Option D, MSDist. The correct answer is option B, Jacoco. Here's why. Jacoco instruments Java bytecode and generates code coverage reports that Azure pipelines can publish with the build results. Why are the other options not correct? A. JUnit executes Java tests, but is not itself the code coverage engine. C. Bullseye coverage primarily targets native C and C++ code. D. MSDist is a Microsoft .NET testing framework. Exam tip. Use Jacoco for Java coverage, Cobertura-compatible reports when required by the publishing task, and JUnit for Java test result reporting. Question number 304. Scenario. A legacy Azure deployment uses the PowerShell desired state configuration extension to ensure that the same Windows feature is installed on every virtual machine. Select and order the 3 actions required to deploy the desired state configuration. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Configure the custom script extension on the virtual machines. Item 2. Upload the configuration package to Azure Files. Item 3. Author a PowerShell DSC configuration file. Item 4. Configure the PowerShell DSC extension on the virtual machines. Item 5. Upload the configuration package to Azure Blob Storage. Item 6. Create a YAML configuration file. The correct sequence is as follows. First, author a PowerShell DSC configuration file. Second, upload the configuration package to Azure Blob Storage. Third, configure the PowerShell DSC extension on the virtual machines. Here's why. The desired state must first be expressed in PowerShell DSC. The extension then requires access to the configuration package before it can apply the configuration to each virtual machine. Exam tip. A DSC extension deployment requires a configuration definition, an accessible configuration package, and extension settings that identify the package and entry point. Question number 305. Scenario. An Azure policy definition targets Microsoft storage accounts resources. The policy denies a resource when the supports HTTPS traffic-only property is not set to true. The definition is assigned at the tenant root management group. What effect does the policy have? The available options are as follows. Option A. It enables encryption at rest for every existing storage account. Option B. It blocks HTTPS requests originating from the public internet. Option C. It blocks the creation or update of storage accounts that do not require secure transfer. Option D. It immediately disables HTTP access on all existing non-compliant storage accounts. The correct answer is option C. It blocks the creation or update of storage accounts that do not require secure transfer. Here's why. The deny effect rejects a create or update request when the storage account type matches and supports HTTPS traffic only is not true. Why are the other options not correct? A. Encryption at rest is a different storage account capability. B. The policy requires HTTPS rather than blocking it. D. A deny policy does not retroactively modify existing non-compliant resources. Exam tip. Azure Policy Deny prevents non-compliant resource requests. It does not automatically repair existing resources unless a remediation-capable effect is used. Question number 306. Scenario. An application insights availability test monitors https://portal.fabricam.example. The test has the following configuration: frequency, 5 minutes test locations, 4 timeout, 30 seconds parse dependent requests, enabled required HTTP status, 200 required page content, Fabricam portal. Complete the statements describing the test behavior. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate option from its drop-down list. Statement 1. The availability test runs the blank. The choices for Statement 1 are every 30 seconds from one random location, every 5 minutes from each configured location, every 5 minutes from one random location, or every 30 seconds from each configured location. Statement 2. With dependent request parsing enabled, the request succeeds only when the blank within the timeout. The choices for Statement 2 are only the server responds to an ICMP request, the root HTML document, and its dependent resources load, every URL referenced by an anchor element opens, or only the DNS lookup completes. For Statement 1, the correct selection is every 5 minutes from each configured location. Each of the 4 configured locations executes the test on the 5-minute schedule. For Statement 2, the correct selection is the root HTML document and its dependent resources load. The web test retrieves the page and its dependent resources rather than following every hyperlink. Exam tip. Availability test frequency is per location, and dependent request parsing retrieves page resources rather than navigating linked pages. Question number 307. Scenario. A development team restores packages from several public registries that are occasionally unavailable. The team wants one Azure Artifacts feed to cache the external packages and provide a consistent package source. Select and order the 3 actions required to implement the solution. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Create an Azure Artifacts feed and configure upstream sources. Item 2. Create a new npm package containing the external packages. Item 3. Update the package manager configuration to reference the Azure Artifacts feed. Item 4. Create a Visual Studio project that references every package. Item 5. Run an initial package restore through the Azure Artifacts feed. Item 6. Repackage every dependency as a universal package. The correct sequence is as follows. First, create an Azure Artifacts feed and configure upstream sources. Second, update the package manager configuration to reference the Azure Artifacts feed. Third, run an initial package restore through the Azure Artifacts feed. Here's why. The upstream-enabled feed must exist before package manager configuration can reference it. Restoring afterward retrieves and caches packages through the Azure Artifacts feed. Exam tip. Upstream packages are saved when they are first requested through an authorized Azure Artifacts feed. Question number 308. Scenario. A DevOps team is designing release pipelines for a microservices architecture. They need to choose the appropriate deployment strategy for various scenarios to minimize risk and downtime. Match each deployment strategy with the corresponding description. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1, blue-green. Source item 2, canary. Source item 3, ring. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A routes a small percentage of early adopter traffic to the new version before expanding to the entire user base. Destination B maintains two identical environments and switches full production traffic from the old to the new environment instantly. Destination C gradually rolls out the application to expanding groups of distinct users or data centers sequentially. The correct mapping is blue-green leads to B, canary leads to A, ring leads to C. Here's why. Blue-green routing cuts traffic fully from an older version to a newer, warmed-up version. Canary deployment tests new code on a small subset of live traffic before wide expansion. Ring deployment gradually pushes changes outward through defined groups of users or infrastructure. Exam tip: choose blue-green for instant, safe rollbacks, and zero downtime. Choose canary to validate new features with a fraction of live traffic. Question number 309. Scenario: a team uses Microsoft-hosted Azure Pipelines agents to compile applications for different operating system platforms. Drag the appropriate agent image to each application type. Each image may be used once, more than once, or not at all. The available source items are as follows. Source item 1, a Microsoft-hosted macOS image. Source item 2, a Microsoft-hosted Ubuntu image. Source item 3, a Microsoft-hosted Windows image with Windows container support. Source item 4, a self-hosted default agent pool. Source item 5, a Linux container job. The destination requirements are as follows. Destination A, an iOS application. Destination B, an IIS application packaged as a Windows container. The first correct mapping is a Microsoft-hosted macOS image, mapped to an iOS application. The second correct mapping is a Microsoft-hosted Windows image with Windows container support, mapped to an IIS application packaged as a Windows container. Here's why. Apple toolchains required for iOS compilation run on macOS. IIS-based Windows containers require a compatible Windows host and container runtime. Exam tip: choose an agent operating system that supports both the application toolchain and the target container operating system. Question number 310. Scenario: a development team tracks work in Azure boards and manages source code in GitHub. Evaluate each statement regarding the Azure boards integration with GitHub. Select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Including the text AB number 123 in a GitHub commit message automatically creates a link to Azure boards work item 123. Statement 2. Including the text fixes AB number 123 in a GitHub pull request description automatically transitions the work item to a done or completed state when the PR is merged. Statement 3. The native Azure boards integration requires GitHub Enterprise Server and does not support GitHub Cloud. Statement 1. Including the text AB number 123 in a GitHub commit message automatically creates a link to Azure boards work item 123. The answer is yes. The AB hashtag prefix triggers the board's integration linkage. Statement 2. Including the text fixes AB number 123 in a GitHub pull request description automatically transitions the work item to a done or completed state when the PR is merged. The answer is yes. State transition keywords combined with AB hashtag automatically update the work item. Statement 3. The native Azure boards integration requires GitHub Enterprise Server and does not support GitHub Cloud. The answer is no. Azure boards integrates seamlessly with GitHub.com, Cloud, as well as GitHub Enterprise. Exam tip: use the AB hashtag prefix explicitly to link Azure boards to GitHub. The standard hashtag alone links to GitHub issues. Question number 311. Scenario: a legacy Azure automation state configuration implementation will centrally maintain the IIS configuration of several Windows Server virtual machines. The PowerShell DSC source configuration is ready for use. Select and order the 4 actions required to establish centralized configuration management. The available items are as follows. Item 1. Install and configure the DSC extension on the virtual machines. Item 2. Upload an unrelated script archive to Azure Blob Storage. Item 3. Create an Azure automation account. Item 4. Register the virtual machines as managed nodes of the automation account. Item 5. Compile the DSC configuration into a node configuration. The correct sequence is as follows. First, create an Azure automation account. Second, compile the DSC configuration into a node configuration. Third, install and configure the DSC extension on the virtual machines. Fourth, register the virtual machines as managed nodes of the automation account. Here's why. The automation account hosts the pull service and compiled node configuration. The virtual machines require the DSC extension before they can register and receive the centralized configuration. Exam tip. Centralized pull-based DSC requires a pull service, compiled node configuration, configured DSC clients, and node registration. You have completed Part 7 of the AZ-400 practice series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.